Leah, are you able to hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, I'm just testing the audio. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Are you ready to start?
I think Scott, you can start if you're feeling like everyone's on, just scanning.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. The meeting is now called to order. Welcome to the first Financial Aid Advisory Committee meeting of 2026. I'm Dr. Scott Lipinski. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Enrollment Management and the Director of Financial Aid at UT Permian Basin. I'm the current chair of the advisory committee, and I'd like to welcome all the current members of the committee and those that are watching the live stream on YouTube. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. As a few reminders of meeting etiquette, the meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. The chair will establish a quorum through roll call. Motions will be voted on by roll call. Each member should identify themselves prior to speaking for the record. Be sure to use the raise hand feature to be recognized by the chair before speaking, and do not use the chat function to address a question. Questions and comments should be stated for the record. We'll now get started with roll call. Tanya Richardson Dean,
Here.
Cecilia Jones,
Here.
Chris Wilhelm. Here. Lisa Martin,
Here.
Mary Escobar,
Here.
Heather Fountain,
Here.
Michelle Hill.
Here.
Jackie Kelly,
Here.
Rebecca Moreno,
Here.
Erica Ramos,
Here.
Beth Tolan,
Here.
Shannon Crossland,
Here.
Debbie Richmond,
Here.
Sandra Moore. Sandra? Cassandra Helms.
I'm here. It's Cassandra Heslop. I'm
Okay.
here. Thank
Sorry.
you. No worries. Thank you.
Megan, Beg-
Here.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Scott Bowe. Scott. Angie Harrow. Angie. Letitia Addison.
Here.
Farzana Folati. Melissa Jones.
Here.
Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item. It's approval of the December 11th meeting minutes. Hopefully you all had a chance to review the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Are there any questions or corrections that need to be made? I'll give you a a bit to review the minutes. If there are none, we'll consider the minutes approved. We'll now move on to agenda item 3, update prior business. Chris?
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Not a whole lot in the way of prior business. I've been asked to remind committee members to please submit your activity reports that Renee distributes after the meeting. We use those to, do the reporting to the board and that kind of thing. So please submit those when Renee sends those around. Should only take a moment. And just a reminder that if we have folks who are missing consecutive meetings and stuff, that's where we get into the rules of the committee. We understand life happens. Sometimes you can't make every meeting. But we really make a concerted effort not to miss consecutive meetings, if at all possible, so that we can, keep you here and keep this committee functioning with getting the best advice from folks all over the state. So I think that's it. Renee, did I miss anything? I'm going to take her silence as agreement.
Yes, that sounds good. And then, Sandra, she is on, she was having some sound issues.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We'll move on to agenda item number 4 then. Agenda item 4 is the call for new financial advisory member nominations. An email was sent out from the coordinating board on March 2nd. It is asking for nominations to be submitted. To be eligible to be nominated, the individual must be a financial aid practitioner, a public high school counselor, or an individual that is employed by a nonprofit in a role that has responsibility for advising students regarding financial aid. Like, you can't nominate yourself. The individual that submits your nomination has to have the authority to approve the nominee's participation on the committee, and nominations are due by April 10th. If you have any questions about the nominations, you can email Chris Wilhelm at Chris, CHRIS, .WILLUHN at highered.texas.gov. With that, now we'll move on to agenda item number 5, update of external relations from John Wyatt.
But before we do that really quick, I just want to mention we have had we still have couple weeks here until the deadline for nominations. We've had a little bit lower than usual number of nominations come in thus far, particularly from folks from 2-year institutions. So if you have colleagues who you think would, be excellent members of this, and part of your professional networks, or folks that you've worked with in the past or whatever, I do encourage you to kind of tap them on the shoulder and have them talk to their institution about being nominated. We, obviously want to have the best group of folks here for this advisory committee, and it's helpful to have a nice pool of folks to choose from, so that we can make sure that we're balancing across different institution types and geography and that kind of thing. So please reach out to your networks if there are people you think would be good fits for the committee.
Well, good morning, everyone. John Wyatt, Senior Director of Government Relations, the Coordinating Board. So this is going to be one of my shortest legislative updates of the biennium, because we are at that kind of odd point where pretty much all the business from the last session has kind of closed out, and we're just kind of waiting to see what's on the horizon for the next session in January of next year. There has been a little bit of news that came out of the Senate, actually just this past week. The Lieutenant Governor announced some changes to the committee structure in the Senate. You may recall that during the session, the Senate had actually combined their public education and higher education committees into a single committee. So it was a K-16 committee. Well, they have undone that. And so we are going to have separate Senate Public Education Committees and a Senate Higher Education Committee during the rest of this interim and during the next session. So Senator Paul Bettencourt will be chairing the Senate Higher Education Committee for the foreseeable future. And that's relevant to the work that the legislature will be doing for the rest of the interim, which will be working on their interim charges. So we have not yet seen the interim charges for the Senate or the House. I think we've discussed this in the past, but interim charges are directives from leadership to committees, directing them to look into specific topics. Really, your interim charges kind of give you an idea of what leadership is prioritizing for the upcoming legislative session. And then the committees will spend usually the spring and the summer holding hearings on those interim charges. So they'll be taking testimony from witnesses. They'll be collecting data and information. Usually the coordinating board is very involved in providing that data to the committee. And then also you'll get to see as members ask questions and have conversations among themselves, kind of where their thinking is on these issues. And then after those hearings have taken place, each committee will write up a report of the testimony and information that was taken on those interim charges, as well as any recommendations that the committee would make regarding those interim charges. So really, this is kind of the first kind of piece of table setting for what the session is going to look like in January. So as I said, we haven't seen those charges yet. The lieutenant governor did release an initial batch of charges back in December, but none of them were higher education related. But we do expect very shortly to see those interim charges, and pretty quickly for committees to start ramping up those interim hearings. So that's really kind of where we are now. So we're kind of in that calm before the storm, but I do expect to mix my metaphors, the starting pistol to go off soon. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for John?
Was there a reason for the kind of revert back to the separate committees?
No reason was given. You may recall that Senator Creighton was the chair of that combined committee. He has now left the Senate. He's now over at Texas Tech. So there was going to have to be a change regardless. So, you know, I can't tell you any particular thinking, but, you know, it does result in now having a single committee that is focused on higher education. So kind of up for y'all to decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Thanks. And sorry, I don't know if I was supposed to announce myself to make it formal. I'm Lisa Martin from Baylor University.
Good morning.
Morning.
Does anybody else have any other questions? John, as always, we appreciate the updates.
Thank y'all. Have a great day.
You too. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a presentation from Roxanne Garza, the OB3 implementation, workforce, Pell, and changes to federal student loan program.
I don't think she's on yet, so we might have to circle back to her, Scott.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to agenda item 7 then. Beth Tolan, an update on the Financial Aid Operations Subcommittee.
Good morning, everyone. The Financial Aid Operations Subcommittee, we met on, March 11th, and we discussed recent and upcoming policy updates, deadlines, program deadlines, and rulemaking. We also discussed the Age Year 26 FAD manual and the updates that were outlined in the February 19th memo from the coordinating board. We discussed some committee questions regarding state aid for students that are attending a single semester, and then also questions regarding the updated residency rules that were adopted November 13th about how they interact with financial aid eligibility. And that's the summary. Does anyone have any questions for me? All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks for the update, Beth. Renee, do you want to move on to agenda item number 8?
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Jones. As you can probably tell, I am not Thomas Ratliff. So just wanted to let you know about the leadership transition within TASFA. Thomas resigned his position with his institution, which made him ineligible to continue in this role. So I have assumed the presidency following our governing documents. So I am still trying to get my feet under me. It has been a very recent change, so I have spent a lot of time over the past week and even into the upcoming week, meeting with our different committees, just getting caught up on where everyone is. Let's see, conference planning is going well. We are still on for October. We will have the conference the 5th through the, I'm sorry, the actual conference is going to be the 7th through the 9th. And then there's the pre-conference training that will happen beginning on the 5th. So we are in the middle of all of our regional training events. The coordinating board has been fantastic in coming to those training events and providing updates. So we're very thankful for that. So far to date, we've had 351 different members register for the events. And once all is said and done at the end of April, we should see over 500 financial aid administrators across the state that have attended that training. So we're really excited about that. Coming up in the next couple of weeks, we have our spring new aid officer workshop. We have seen a decrease in enrollment for that this spring. We're kind of discussing what may be causing that. There may be some budgetary restrictions and then also some competition from federal student aid doing their training. So we're just kind of looking at our training across the state. We've had a couple of meetings regarding a revamp to that training protocol, just kind of making sure that we're meeting the needs of our members. Let's see, I think that's about it. I'm really excited about the opportunity to serve in this role. I'm excited about the networking options that we want to try to further introduce. I mean, that's what TASFA is all about. You know, TASFA is great because of their members. So that is our update for right now. Are there any questions?
If there's no questions for Melissa. Melissa, thank you. We appreciate you giving an update from TASFA.
Scott Roxanne is now joined, so we can go to her presentation.
Okay. Okay, so now we'll Roxanne Garza, who's the Director of Higher Education Policy, the Texas Education Trust, will now give a presentation on the OB3 implementation, workforce Pell, and changes to federal student loan programs. Roxanne?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Scott. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Roxanne Garza. I'm the Director of Higher Education Policy at Trust. Really excited to be here with you all today to talk about some of the federal changes that have happened to financial aid, particularly through the reconciliation bill that happened last summer and that are set to go into effect this summer. And so I'm going to run through a few slides on some of those changes, and then we'll definitely have time for Q&A. But please, if questions kind of come up throughout the presentation or you want to clarify something, feel free to jump in here. Scott, should I share my screen for the presentation, or what makes?
Yes, you can share.
Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and try and do that now. Okay, can you all see my screen? Yep, okay, great. All right, let me just minimize this. Okay, so again, talking about federal changes, federal shifts, and how they impact locally in terms of, you know, students, programs on the ground starting this summer. Just a quick going through the agenda here. We'll start with going through student graduate loan limits, going into loan repayment, and then of course changes to the Pell Grant, including workforce Pell. So these are some of the bigger changes related to federal financial aid that were part of the bill, again, that passed last summer. Of course, there were some other, you know, changes that impact higher education, but we'll definitely focus on the changes to financial aid today. So just to kind of go through again, top lines, from the bill, because of course I think one of the primary goals was to really kind of find savings in the bill, to cover other costs that Congress and the administration were prioritizing. So about 300 billion was cut from federal financial aid over the next 10 years. And that was, again, through a variety of changes. But I think some of the bigger changes are the ones that we'll cover today, which, of course, there are new loan limits for graduate students in particular, and parents of undergraduate students. And so the biggest change there was the elimination of Grad Plus loans. So we'll go over that in more detail. Then there was the overhaul of the federal student loan repayment system. So there was, a big change, big simplification to a lot of the different plans that are currently out there. So we'll go into that. And then some changes to Pell Grant eligibility, and of course the really big change, which is the introduction of the new workforce Pell Grant programs, which we'll also go over. So starting here with the student loan limits, so I'm sure you all are aware of the current policy, the current landscape here, right? Which is that students pursuing graduate education currently have access to Grad Plus loans, which essentially allow graduates and professional students to borrow up to the full cost of attendance, right? So if students, after aid still, have a gap of unmet need, they can borrow from the Grad Plus program to meet their needs, right? But so the new policy, or what essentially went into effect after the bill that was passed last summer, is that Grad Plus loans no longer exist. They will no longer be available to new students that will be borrowing after July 1. And then there were also limits put on the unsubsidized loans for graduate students. So borrowers attending graduate programs will be capped at $20,500 per year with a lifetime borrowing limit of $100,000. And then there's a different limit for professional programs. So students attending professional programs can borrow up to $50,000 per year and a $200,000 lifetime limit. And here, I think through this two-tiered system, what the intention was, one, I think the intention behind putting caps here is that would help put pressure on programs to lower the cost of programs, and therefore, decreasing the need for borrowing at the graduate level. I think there are a lot of questions and concerns about whether that will actually happen. I think, definitely a very worthy goal, to try and put in policies that hopefully would put downward pressure on cost for students, but it's unclear whether that actually will happen. One, either because, if programs actually don't have a lot of room to lower costs, right? Maybe they don't have a lot of ability to lower that cost. But regardless, I think students will still have access to other kinds of aid or loans to potentially cover those costs. So I think there are a lot of questions around what impact this will actually have. And then I think again, the intention between the two-tiered system is that certain programs maybe have a higher return on investment. Students might be more likely to be able to take on larger amounts of loans and to pay them off later. And so there's a higher loan limit for certain programs. And I'll go into in a second, the difference between those two. But then there were also big changes to the Parent Plus loan program. So currently, a parent of a dependent undergraduate student can borrow a Parent Plus loan to help their child cover up to the full cost of attendance. The change there, it's still available to parents, but there is a limit now. So borrowing is capped at $20,000 per year for each dependent student, with a lifetime limit of $65,000 per student. So again, these policies are set to come into effect this summer. So new borrowers that would be borrowing after July 1. And so just to go into a little bit more detail about, sorry, hold on one second. There we go. So currently, the Department of Education is working on finalizing their regulation that would govern how all of these different changes would work. So the Department of Education, earlier this year released a draft rule. There was a public comment period that closed on March 2nd. And that public comment period got a lot of attention, a lot of comments, because, as I'm sure a lot of you may know, there has been just a lot of attention on this particular issue of what is considered a professional program because of those higher loan limits that students have access to. And I think also there was also some, nuance in the messaging of, okay, is your program considered a professional program versus a graduate program, and why are certain programs not considered professional? So currently, the way that the rule or the Department of Education is defining professional programs, you'll see here in this kind of salmon-colored rectangle. These are the different requirements that a program would have to satisfy in order to be defined as professional and allowed for that higher loan limit. So there are about 11 fields of study that qualify with some additional requirements here, which you can see here. I think the biggest issue is that this definition omits some high demand healthcare roles. So definitely programs in nursing and social work, I would say, are some of the programs that have gotten a lot of attention because there is a lot of demand for these professions across the country, and so there's a lot of concern that this policy change will really restrict access to these programs. So if students aren't able to get the aid that they need to attend these programs, what does that do to the pipeline of professionals coming into these fields? So I think, the Department of Education had a lot of comments come in about changing that definition, or at least allowing for some of these other healthcare related roles in the definition. So we have yet to see how the department will respond to the comments. Currently, that is sort of what's happening right now. Is after the public comment period closed, the department reviews all of those comments. They are required to review all of those comments and respond to them, and then release a finalized rule. So we have yet to see how the department is likely to respond, whether they will change the definition for professional programs. It's likely that we will see some change or some adjustment, but unclear to what extent or how broad they will go. And that's because I think, again, there's been a lot of pressure also put on Congress to change or to fix this issue if the department doesn't broaden the definition. So now I will go to the next slide to talk about timeline and implications for students. So again, these loan limits are effective as of July 1 for new students. It is important to note there is a legacy provision that is included. So if a borrower has a direct loan that's been made before July 1, they were enrolled in a program of study and are still enrolled, the borrower can continue to borrow for that program for either 3 academic years or the remainder of their expected time to the credential, whichever is less. So this was sort of like the compromise to kind of lessen the impact to current students. So that is an important caveat to mention. And then I think generally in terms of implications for students, or what students need to know, what anyone advising or supporting students on the ground needs to know is that, again, the concern here really is that this will limit access for students into some of these graduate programs. So I think what we're concerned about is, will students kind of forego graduate education altogether? They're likely to turn to the private loan market to meet that unmet cost of attendance. But of course, the problem with that is that, if you're trying to take out a private loan, there are, of course, also all sorts of strict credit requirements with that. So students may not qualify for a loan. They'll need to have a cosigner. And there are also less consumer protections, right, with private loans. So, again, I think there is the idea that, students will have access to other ways to borrow money that they need to go to these programs, but it's not, it's not a guarantee that students will be able to get that access to those loans. So I think we have yet to see what that actually does to graduate education as a whole, but in particular for certain fields, it may not qualify for that higher loan limit. I think the other piece here of again is the need for state and institutional aid alternatives will increase. So students will of course be turning to their institutions, to their states to see what other alternatives do they have potentially if they don't want to go to the private loan market, or again, I mean, if they are just exploring their options, we really want institutions, students to be able to have the information that they need on what other options they have, especially, for some of the higher cost programs. And then of course, as I've mentioned, I think there's just definitely a need for, communication plans to be put in place, making sure that students know about these changes. Current students, again, even though there is this legacy provision, that they know that there is kind of like a time-bound limit on how long they can borrow at the current rates. And then I think, we're encouraging institutions and of course states to be assessing, which programs are likely to be impacted by these loan limits, and setting up plans for how, is there any room to lower costs or provide aid for students that might need that aid. So I think there's a lot of considerations right now for institutions, for programs, and how they're communicating these changes to their graduate students. So I'll switch gears to the student loan repayment system, which is another very, very big change. So, HR 1 created 2 plans for new borrowers, again, after July 1 of this year. So they created a standard repayment plan with fixed monthly payments that are based on the borrower's outstanding principal. So this is, again, a big change that is really dependent on the amount the student has borrowed. So if you borrowed less than $25,000, your standard repayment plan will be 10 years. If you borrowed more than that, it starts to increase, right? 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. Then they also created the Repayment Assistance Plan, or RAP, and this is essentially the new income-based repayment plan that they've created. And this is also a little tricky in that it steadily increases the percentage of income that is used to calculate the individual's monthly payment plan. So if you don't have any income, or if you have a very low income of less than $10,000, you have a monthly minimum payment of $10. And then it goes up from there, as you could see the kind of schedule here of percentage that is used to calculate based on a student's income. So it really, really varies. And I would say this is very different from the options that students currently have. So it's important to note that the reconciliation bill did sunset several of the current income-driven repayment plans. And I ask that you bear with me a little bit because I know that this can get a little wonky, but there are several repayment plans right now. And again, to Congress's credit, there is a need to simplify, right? Because this can get confusing, but the new plans are not necessarily, as generous for borrowers. So the income contingent repayment plan, the pay-as-you-earn plan, and then the saving on a valuable education plan, the SAVE plan, which, I think has been in the news a lot and was definitely the most affordable plan available to borrowers. All of those plans are sunset in the reconciliation bill. And the reason why that gets a little confusing is that for current borrowers that are in those plans, they can still stay in those plans until July of 2028. So they, again, have some leeway. There's kind of like an off-ramp period, right, where students or student borrowers don't have to make a change before July 1 of this year, but before 2028, they do need to transition. And if they don't make a selection by that date, they will automatically be moved into the new repayment assistance plan, which is the new, income-based repayment plan. So again, I think, some critical, aspects for borrowers to know and to make sure that people, again, that are interacting and providing guidance to borrowers, some of the things that are really important to note. And again, the reason why I say that these new plans are not as generous for borrowers, especially borrowers experiencing, a low income or financial hardship, is that borrowers would no longer have access to plans that protect a certain amount of your income. So, for some of these other income-driven repayment plans, a certain percentage of a borrower's income was protected. So some plans had 150, the state plan had 225 of the federal poverty line that was protected. Right. So for example, a borrower in a family of three making just shy of 60,000 would have had a $0 payment on the SAVE plan. And that's because of that income protection that is really considered necessary for living, for basic necessities. The new RAP plan doesn't protect any income for families. So again, as I mentioned, even for families making no, even for a borrower who is making no income, they will still have that $10 minimum monthly payment. The other thing to note here, as I kind of showed in the previous slide, is that the time period for potential, forgiveness goes from 20 to 25 years, to 30 years for borrowers who only have access to the repayment assistance plan. Again, it ends $0 payments for the lowest income borrowers to take out new loans with that minimum payment of $10. And again, the reason why that is important is because requiring at least even that $10 minimum payment, which again, may not sound like a significant amount, is for borrowers and families that are experiencing significant hardship. And if they don't make that payment, it's going to be even easier for borrowers to fall into delinquency and default, which of course come with pretty significant, financial repercussions. So again, all of these things are just really important for borrowers to be aware of as they, think about their options, as they think about, the amount that they have to borrow and what their future might look like in terms of repayment. So I will now go to some of the Pell Grant changes. And I'm going to talk about Workforce Pell in a second, but there were some other changes that happened with Pell Grant eligibility. One thing that I think, folks were pretty excited about is that Congress did put in a $10.5 billion infusion into the FY26 Pell Grant for mandatory funding in order to help fill a potential shortfall. So I think that was great news that happened, along with some of these eligibility changes that are kind of a mixed bag of how they will impact students. So one, which maybe you all are familiar with, is cutting Pell Grants for those with a full ride from non-federal sources. So here, really the intention behind this change was specifically for college athletes that get full rides to a university to play a sport. Members in Congress, some members in Congress thought, well, if you're getting a full ride, from, again, non-federal sources, you should not have access to a Pell Grant, even if you are technically eligible for that Pell Grant. I think the problem here is that just create some nuance and confusion for the program, what counts as a non-federal source. So again, that's all detailed in the draft rule, but that was a change that was put into place. Foreign income is now included in SAI calculations. The other big change is that effective this summer, the law exempts assets from family farms, small businesses, and family-owned commercial fisheries from the SAI calculation. The bad news, I would say, that has been kind of making headlines in the last month or so is that while through the reconciliation bill, Congress did put in this 10.5 billion infusion that was really meant to be kind of like a temporary Band-Aid or something to try and make sure that there was no shortfall in FY26, and hopefully going into FY27, the Pell Grant would be in a pretty stable position. Now, actually, projections from the Congressional Budget Office show a significant budget gap. So, CBO is estimating a 5.45 billion gap for FY26 and over an $11 billion gap for FY27. Those are huge, huge numbers to try and fill that gap. So I would say, organizations like Trust and a lot of other partners are doing a lot of advocacy and trying to communicate to the Hill how important it is to fill this shortfall. Obviously, the projections before this updated projection were pretty off. And really, I would say that even though the shortfall is really terrible news, we are in this position because of positive policy changes. So, for example, the FAFSA is working, right? It's now fully functional. More students than ever are filling it out. And being eligible and getting access to Pell Grants, that's a good thing. The FAFSA simplification bill from a few years ago, again, is working, and it's created an environment where more students qualify for Pell Grants. It's easier for students to fill out the FAFSA and access Pell Grants, but that has led us to this shortfall because Congress has not made the commensurate investments that are needed for these additional, changes and these expansions of the program. So I would say, it's really, really important, to the extent that you all work with your government affairs offices or, just to be communicating the importance of filling this shortfall because this is, a pretty significant gap that while it may not be felt this academic year, it will start to really impact students in the coming years, and it is something that requires a fix pretty immediately. So I will talk about workforce Pell next, which is I think on a lot of folks' minds, especially at the state level. So here I just have a table that lays out sort of like the basics of the program. And this is really intended to be a program that is run by states, led by the governor, with some checks from the Department of Education or the federal government. So there are some requirements in the federal law, some kind of like basic eligibility requirements. So some of these requirements are that programs are at least 150, but less than 600 clock hours. These programs have to be happening between 8 and 15 weeks in length. They have to be offered by an accredited Title IV eligible institution. So I think likely what we'll see is that many of these programs will likely be offered by community colleges across the country. And they can't be brand new programs. They will have to have been operating for at least 12 months in the exact same way. So, still meeting all of the eligibility criteria over the last 12 months. So again, it's not the case that a program could be stood up, now and qualify in fall 2026. They would not be eligible until, again, they were operational for 12 months, showing outcomes that are required. So really, a lot of these decisions are left up to the governor in collaboration with workforce boards and we hope, state higher education agencies. So programs have to be aligned to high skill, high wage, or in demand sectors, and that's defined by the state. But the governor has to approve that those programs are aligned again to those criteria. Programs have to be aligned with the hiring requirements of potential employers. They have to lead to a stackable or portable recognized post-secondary credential. They also have to lead to credit towards a subsequent credential or degree. So while the program itself might be a non-credit or a non-degree program, it does have to articulate into credit for another credential or degree if the student decides to pursue something later. And then there are sort of these like accountability checks that the Department of Education runs. So the programs have to have a 70% completion rate, they have to have a 70% job placement rate, and they have to meet a value-added earnings test, which is essentially that programs cannot charge tuition and fees that exceed the amount of the value-added earnings. And the way that value-added earnings are calculated is that it is the difference between the median earnings of the graduates minus 150% of the federal poverty line. So essentially, this really acts more as a cap on tuition and fees for these programs. But these are generally the guidelines for the framework of the program, again, with a significant amount of decisions and discretion left to states to really craft that process for approval, how programs will be approved and what's necessary for programs to produce to the governor's office, to the workforce board in order to gain approval. Sorry, I don't know why this is on a little bit of a lag. Okay. So again, this along with, all the other changes go into effect July 1. So, state timelines for getting these systems up and running are different, right? Some states are much further along just in terms of the programs that they have, the data infrastructure that they have in order to collect this information. So such as like the completion, job placement rates, earnings, like all of those things that are necessary data collections to be happening. States are in different places, for this. So while yes, the Department of Education will be ready to start, accepting programs, while students will technically be able to qualify for a Workforce Pell grant as of July 1. That's only to the extent that there are approved programs in the student state, right? And so again, I think what we will very likely see is that states will be kind of setting up these programs on a rolling basis. So you might see a state, like Texas that maybe is, further along in this work, potentially be ready, with program approvals by July 1. You might see other states where maybe they'll approve a small set of programs, for fall 2026 and maybe do like an on-ramp period where they expand program approvals later. I think this is going to look very different across the country, even though, yes, technically it does go into effect July 1. That does not necessarily mean that all states will be kind of up and running with several programs approved by July 1. And I just wanted to point folks to this announcement from March 12th that the Higher Ed Coordinating Board published, which really, stipulates that, the governor's office, the workforce board, the coordinating board are starting to work together to, design and get this program up and running. So I would just encourage folks, to kind of stay tuned into, how that process moves along and what it's looking like in terms of how, approvals will happen. But I think some key things to note here, again, for students is that, financial aid administrators, high school counselors, advisors should all really be equipped with this information about Workforce Pell and the fact that students now, if they fill out the FAFSA, that opens up opportunities, not just for, your traditional maybe 2 or 4 year degree programs, but also for these short-term workforce programs. So if that is an option that students want to consider, I think we want to make sure that, the people, again, that are on the ground, counseling them, supporting them in looking at their options, like are equipped with the knowledge about this new program and how it stacks up, against the other options that a student has, and that students, have that information so that they can weigh their options. I think the other important piece here is that students who enroll in short-term Pell programs will start to use up their Pell lifetime eligibility, right? So, if a student decides to use a Pell Grant on a short-term workforce program and later decides to pursue a degree program, that's fine. They're still, they will still be eligible, but they will start, using up their lifetime Pell eligibility. I think that's an important aspect for students to know. And then I think the other piece that we're flagging for states that do have current, financial aid programs for workforce programs or other type of programs at the state level is like, how will those aid programs really integrate with Workforce Pell to meet the students' needs, right? Because Workforce Pell, while yes, it will now be available to students, it may not actually cover the full cost of attendance for a student at one of these programs. So if there are other available sources at the state level for students to pursue these programs, I think it's important for states, to think about how those programs will integrate, and of course make sure that people that are packaging aid are aware of that, and again can communicate that to students. So I think that is it. Definitely open to any questions, comments, anything that you all might be thinking about, or questions that I could help answer, but I will stop sharing my screen here. Okay, and I also want to be mindful of time. How much time do we have?
You're good on time.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple of questions.
Mhm.
I'm going to go back to the student loan limits first. And let's say, so if parents, I'm just trying to think outside the box in all case scenarios. If students' parents are divorced, could each parent take out loans and both have limits of 65K?
So I would have to
Not that I'd recommend it.
triple check on that, but I
Okay.
don't believe so, because I believe it's
Same
based
student.
on the student, right? So I don't think so. It would be, that limit applies to the student versus the parent. So I'm like 95% sure that that is not the case, but it's a good question, and I will definitely double check on that.
And along those same lines, I was thinking, as far as bigger families, this is the total amount for even if they have more than one child, or is it per student?
Per student.
Okay.
Yeah, per dependent student. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, then you talked later, this last question. I actually just recently had read about the law that left it up to institutions in regard to default to work with families that took out loans to so they didn't ultimately go into default. So now what you're saying is that's not that's not going to be around again. Because originally they weren't protected. They couldn't file chapter, 13 bankruptcy. But then I did see on federal student aid site recently that there was the law that protected them kind of sort of. Were you saying later when we were talking about this new student loan repayment timeline and implications, that that's gone away again or will go away?
So there are options for like extreme circumstances of hardship, but the way that before students had access to, or student borrowers had access to, like financial hardship or unemployment hardship, like those are no longer options for students. So again, or student borrowers. So again, if they're not making that $10 minimum payment, they will go into delinquency and then potentially default. There are options, of course, for loan rehabilitation. So that, again, that is an option, but I think it's going to be really, really difficult again, because students will not have the option to say, okay, well, I'm currently unemployed. I need to put my loan into forbearance, right? Which used to be an option for borrowers. That will no longer be an option. So I think
Forbearance.
we're very likely to see the levels of default go up significantly, and we already are seeing that, right, as a return of payments, right, after all of the COVID pauses. So yes, the risk of default and the increases in the percentage of default are definitely a big concern.
Okay. Thank you for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Roxanne, I just wanted to mention you are correct about the aggregate limit. The 65,000 is per student.
Oh, okay. Thank
Yep.
you so much.
Hi, Roxanne. I'm Lisa Martin from Baylor University. Quick question, and this is not part of your presentation, so if you don't have answers, it's totally okay. I was just wondering if you have heard anything about with the default rates and things of that nature, the accountability measures that might be, I guess, handed over to institutions and what kind of impacts that could have.
Yeah, it's definitely something we're paying attention to. I know the Department of Education recently released new data on the cohort default rates and how, again, we are very likely to see those rates go up for institutions, again, because, we've been in this very irregular period over the last several years, right? Of students essentially not defaulting because of the COVID payment pauses. So I'm happy to share it in the chat. I'll look for it. But I know that the department recently put out, a statement where they are encouraging institutions to reach out to their students, make sure that students have the information that they need about repayment, obviously, starting again, and making sure that students know what their options are, know who their servicers are, because those default rates are very likely going to skyrocket. And to your point, I think it's been several years since institutions have really actually had to pay attention to the cohort default rates and the potential sanctions that could come along with that. So I would say, I mean, I think the only thing I've officially seen come out from the department is this statement that was essentially, encouraging institutions to reach back out to the students that had completed or had left and are in or have a loan that should be in repayment, connecting them to any support. But again, I think the other difficult piece here is, you all may have seen that the department also put out a statement about how they are planning to move over the defaulted loan portfolio to the Treasury Department. And this is kind of all part of the larger, plan to dismantle the department, wind down operations, and in phases move over the loan portfolio to the Treasury Department, starting with defaulted loans. So I think that also creates another level of uncertainty because it's unclear, like, who a student, if you are in default, who you should go to for questions, who you should go to for support. Like, should you contact your servicer? Should it be somebody at the department or at Treasury? And like, what does that mean for involuntary collection? I think there are a lot of questions right now about just logistically how to get back on the right track at a time. Again, as you mentioned, that default rates are probably going to go up, and that also brings along consequences for institutions. So I'm happy to. I'm going to share a few resources after the call that I'm hoping can be shared with the group, and I will include some information about the cohort default rates as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
One other question, sorry. This is more kind of, again, general in nature, but the Workforce Pell Grant, my understanding is that funding is the same as the traditional Pell Grant. And so with knowing that there's kind of some shortfalls, has there been any conversation or alarms going off for anybody about kind of implementing this additional, opportunity?
Yeah, no, it definitely has come up. I think, folks are definitely worried that, again, we're in an environment of a shortfall at a time when the program's being expanded, right, to new programs, potentially new students that maybe were not previously applying for Pell because maybe they were not planning to go to, a 2 or 4 year college. My understanding is that, I guess the positive is that because it's unclear at this point how many programs will be approved, how many students will opt into the program. I think, the sense is that Workforce Pell is probably not what's driving the projected shortfall, at least not in any significant way, because we really don't know at this point how many programs and students will take up the program. It really is this like expansion of, students now being either newly eligible or again having a better time, an easier time with the FAFSA. Again, all positive things. But really it is an issue of just, policies that have been passed over the last few years working and the amount of investment just not keeping up with those policy changes. So yes, I think there is some attention. And because of that, I think there are some advocates saying, well, we need to make sure that, the programs that are approved for Workforce Pell are high quality, that we know they're going to meet the eligibility requirements, right? That we really need to be thinking critically about the approval and eligibility process as we think about these very already very like limited resources for Pell, because it is still just one big pot of funding.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else?
This was really, really helpful and awesome. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. I hope it was helpful. I know that it's a lot. There are a lot of changes, a lot of really, really big changes that happened as part of this bill, and things that, we didn't even get to. I think the other, big changes, I'm sure maybe top of mind is the new, accountability, the broader accountability for institutions, right, that have to now clear an earnings test in order to continue to be eligible for the Title IV loan program. And so there are just a lot of changes happening all at the same time, with a Department of Education that does not have a lot of staff to implement a lot of these changes. So we are trying to kind of support with any ways that we can be communicating about the changes. And again, also on the flip side, making sure that we are communicating how this is challenging for people, in states and in institutions, back to the department through our public comments and everything else that, is currently like an opportunity to weigh in. So, would definitely encourage, folks, to the extent that you can, be sharing, any challenges or concerns that you are having. But really, really, again, appreciate the time. And I'm happy to, if after the fact there are questions or anything that we can help provide, happy to do so. I don't know if my contact information will be shared, but that I'm fine with that. And like I said, I will follow up with a few resources that I think could be helpful on these topics. But yeah, if there's nothing else, I will.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Roxanne? If not, then Roxanne, we appreciate you giving these updates on loans and repayment and Pell. And thanks for everything.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And I'll be in touch with some additional resources, and have a good meeting.